In 1903, a man claiming to be the seventh messenger of God stepped off a train in Michigan with a group of followers who had pledged never to cut their hair or beards again. By the 1920s, this tiny, eccentric group had built a multi-million-dollar empire that dominated professional baseball, baffled the U.S. government, and became the most famous tourist attraction in the Midwest. You are about to see how a group of bearded outsiders went from living in tents to owning the most successful entertainment park in the state, and how a secret scandal brought it all crashing down. If you stick around to the end, you will learn the one hidden secret about their leader that the newspapers were too afraid to print at the time. Welcome back to All Religious Story, and if you are new here, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss what is coming. Benjamin Purnell and his wife Mary were not your average religious leaders. They arrived in Benton Harbor, Michigan, with a vision that was as ambitious as it was strange. They called their movement the Israelite House of David. The theology was built around the idea of the ingathering, a belief that they were the ones tasked with gathering the lost tribes of Israel before the end of the world. To these people, the outside world was corrupt, dirty, and doomed. They wanted to build a paradise on earth, a place where they could live according to their own rules, grow their own food, and wait for the second coming of Christ. Benton Harbor was the perfect spot for them. It was a growing town with plenty of space, and the Midwestern spirit of that era was full of utopian experiments. People were looking for something better than the soot-filled factories of the big cities. They were looking for community. Benjamin told his followers that to show their devotion, they had to let their hair and beards grow long. It was a physical mark of their separation from the world. Men with waist-length hair and thick, flowing white beards became a common sight in the streets of Benton Harbor. It was a strange, haunting image for the locals, but for the followers, it was a badge of honor. But wait, the craziest part is still ahead, because these people were not just hiding in their commune. They were about to turn capitalism on its head. The House of David was a corporation disguised as a church. They were incredibly efficient at making money. They didn't just pray, they worked. They built cold storage plants to preserve fruit. They started their own shipping lines. And they created a massive amusement park that attracted thousands of tourists every single weekend. They were vegetarians. They didn't drink and they didn't smoke. They lived a life of strict discipline. But they were also some of the best business minds in Michigan. They turned communal labor into a multi-million-dollar engine. Visitors would flock to Benton Harbor just to catch a glimpse of these long-haired men and women. The curiosity was infectious. People wanted to know how these bearded hermits were living such a high-tech, successful life. They weren't just building a church, they were building an empire that would soon make them the most watched people in America. The crown jewel of their empire was, of all things, a baseball team. You might think a group of religious zealots wouldn't care for sports. But the House of David team was legendary. They were the Harlem Globetrotters of the baseball world. They played in the best stadiums in the country, and crowds of 10,000 people would pack the stands just to see them. They wore their hair long and their beards tucked into their jerseys. But they could play the game better than anyone else. They did fancy tricks, they had incredible reflexes, and they played with a joy that was infectious. They were the biggest draw in semi-pro baseball. If you are finding this story as wild as I am, hit subscribe so we can keep digging into these forgotten slices of history. Think about the contrast. On one side of the state, you had the regular, clean-shaven Americans working in the factories. On the other, you had these bearded giants who looked like they stepped out of a painting from the Book of Revelation, sliding into home plate and stealing bases with a speed that made everyone's jaw drop. They were icons. They sold out every game they played. But while the team was winning hearts on the field, the situation back at the colony was starting to sour. The outside world began to get suspicious. They saw the money, they saw the fame, and they started to ask where all the wealth was actually going. The authorities in Michigan started to take a closer look at Benjamin Purnell. They heard whispers that the prophet was not exactly the humble, holy man he pretended to be. People were starting to talk about his living quarters, the secret rooms, and the way he treated the women in the commune. The legal battles that began to surround Benjamin were just the tip of the iceberg. It wasn't just about religious freedom anymore. It was about power, control, and accusations that would make anyone's skin crawl. The authorities thought they had him cornered, but they had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. The tension grew every single day. The press started to camp out near the commune, waiting for any sign of a crack in the armor. They wanted to see the prophet, but he was always hiding. He was like a ghost in his own kingdom. The legal system was closing in. The government sued the colony for everything they had, claiming the whole thing was a fraud. The trial was the talk of the entire nation. Newspapers across the country ran headlines about the bearded prophet who lived in luxury while his followers did all the work. It was a spectacle, and the public couldn't get enough of it. This is the moment everything changed for the commune. If this story has you hooked, drop a comment with your favorite lost history topic. The courtroom was packed. Every time a witness took the stand, the crowd would lean in. The House of David members stood by their leader, insisting that the accusations were just lies made up by enemies of the faith. They believed in Benjamin with everything they had. They felt that he was their only bridge to God. But the evidence was piling up. There were stories of abuse, stories of secret bank accounts, and stories of a man who loved power way more than he loved his own message. Benjamin Purnell was a master at dodging the law. He would hide in secret compartments built into the walls of the commune whenever the police came knocking. It was a bizarre game of cat and mouse that lasted for years. He was the most famous man in Benton Harbor, and yet nobody could seem to find him. It was as if he lived in a different dimension, protected by the very people he was accused of exploiting. The irony was thick. The religious group that preached total transparency was actually living behind a wall of intense secrecy. As the 1920s rolled on, the strain of the legal battles finally started to take its toll. The money was being drained away by lawyer fees and fines. The amusement park was still running, but the magic was fading. People were starting to see the House of David for what it really was, a business that had outgrown its own morality. The death of Benjamin Purnell in 1927 marked the beginning of the end. With the prophet gone, the followers were left to deal with the wreckage of their own legacy. The commune didn't disappear overnight, but it was never the same again. It became a shadow of its former self, a place where the beards were still long, but the spirit was broken. Today, if you go to Benton Harbor, you won't find the bustling crowds or the legendary baseball games. Most of the buildings have been torn down or repurposed for modern life. The amusement park is gone, though you can still find parts of the old miniature railroad tracks hidden in the overgrown brush if you know where to look. It feels like a graveyard of a dream that was too big for its own good. We think of them as just a strange footnote, but what they left behind is still hidden in plain sight. The House of David reminds us that the line between a community and a prison is often blurred by the charisma of a single person. It is easy to follow someone who promises you a better world, especially when they build you a park, give you a job, and tell you that you are part of something special. But when that leader stops being a servant of the people and starts becoming a master, the whole thing falls apart. It is a cautionary tale about human nature, about the need to belong, and about the danger of putting someone on a pedestal that they never deserved to be on in the first place. Think about those baseball players again. Picture them running around the bases, their long beards blowing in the wind, cheered on by thousands of people who had no idea what was happening behind those high walls. It is a haunting image. The public spectacle was the only thing people cared about, and it was the only thing keeping the colony alive. Once the image was shattered, the reality had nowhere to hide. The legacy of the House of David is complicated. Some people remember them for their hard work and their contribution to Michigan's culture. Others remember them for the scandal and the way they were used by a man who claimed to be a messenger of God. It is a story that refuses to be simple. It is a story that shows us just how far people will go when they are convinced they are doing the right thing. The buildings might be gone, but the story remains. It is a story that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the leaders we choose, and to understand that even the most devout communities are made of people who can be led astray. Every Goliath, whether it is a government, a legal system, or a massive public scandal, eventually meets its match. And in the case of the House of David, the match wasn't another person. It was the truth. The truth always finds a way to come out, no matter how many walls you build or how many secret rooms you hide in. It is a strange, sad, and fascinating chapter in American history. It tells us that we are all susceptible to the lure of a charismatic leader, and that we all have a responsibility to keep our eyes open. The House of David didn't just disappear. It dissolved into the history of Michigan, leaving behind a warning for anyone who might be tempted to build a kingdom on earth. When we look back at the photos, it is hard not to be struck by the intensity in their eyes. These were real people. They had families. They had jobs. They had dreams. They weren't just caricatures with long beards. They were human beings who were caught up in something that was way bigger than them. They gave everything to Benjamin Purnell. And in the end, they were left with nothing but the memory of a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The House of David is a part of the American story that we often forget. But it is one that we should remember. It tells us about who we were, who we are, and who we might become if we aren't careful. It is a story about the intersection of religion and business, of faith and greed, and of the power that comes from a group of people who are willing to do anything for their leader. If you take anything away from this, let it be this: always question the pedestal. Never assume that someone is telling you the truth just because they look like a prophet. And remember that the most beautiful, successful, and popular things are often the ones that have the darkest secrets hidden in the back room. The story of the House of David is not just a footnote, it is a lesson. It is a lesson that we are still learning, even 100 years later. As the sun sets on the old grounds in Benton Harbor, you can almost hear the faint echo of a cheering crowd. You can almost see the ghosts of the bearded players running across the grass. It is a place that feels heavy with history, a place where a lot of hope and a lot of pain were once locked away behind a fence. It is a reminder that we are all just looking for a place to belong, and that we need to be very careful about where we decide to plant our roots. The kingdom of the long-haired giants might be gone, but the story of Benjamin Purnell and his followers will continue to intrigue anyone who cares to dig a little deeper. It is a story that has everything: power, scandal, baseball, and a whole lot of hair. It is a story that reminds us that history is never just about dates and events. It is about the people who lived it, and the mistakes they made along the way. Every time we talk about these forgotten stories, we keep them alive. We make sure that the lessons they left behind aren't lost to time. We make sure that we don't forget the people who, for a few short years, thought they were building heaven on earth, only to find that the world outside was just as complicated as the one they were trying to leave behind. So, the next time you see a group of people who seem a little too perfect, or a leader who seems a little too sure of themselves, remember the House of David. Remember the beards. Remember the baseball. And remember the secret rooms. It's a story that never gets old because it is a story that repeats itself in one way or another throughout human history. And that is why we keep telling it. Because we are all just trying to figure out how to live in this world. And sometimes, the best way to learn is by looking at the people who tried to build their own. The story is a long one, and it is a complicated one, but it is a necessary one. It is a part of the American spirit that is both beautiful and tragic, and it is something that we should all take a moment to understand. Because when we understand the past, we are better prepared for the future. And that is the true purpose of the story of the House of David. It is a reminder that we are all human, and that we are all capable of incredible things, for better or for worse. We look at these old pictures and we see a different time. We see a time when people had the courage to live differently, even if they were wrong. We see a time when a community could come together and create something that was truly unique. And we see a time when one man could lead them all in a direction that was ultimately their undoing. It is a story that stays with you, because it is a story about the fragility of hope and the power of belief. Whether you think they were heroes or villains, one thing is certain: they were unforgettable. They made their mark on Michigan. They made their mark on baseball. And they made their mark on the American imagination. And that is more than most of us can say. So, let's keep remembering. Let's keep digging. And let's keep looking for the truth, no matter how deep it might be buried. It is easy to judge them from the comfort of our own lives, but we have to remember that they were just people who wanted something more. They wanted a life that was better than the one they were given, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get there. Sometimes that leads to greatness, and sometimes that leads to disaster. In the case of the House of David, it led to both, and that is perhaps the most important thing to remember. We are all capable of both. We are all capable of building empires, and we are all capable of tearing them down. The choice is ours, and that is why the story of the House of David is one that we should never stop telling, because it is our story too. It is the story of what happens when we lose our way, and what happens when we finally find the truth. The long beards are gone. The baseball team is a memory. The amusement park is just a field. But the story remains, and as long as we keep talking about it, the House of David will never truly be forgotten. They will remain a part of our history, a part of our culture, and a part of the lessons that we have to keep learning over and over again. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for: to leave a story that is worth telling, to leave a mark that is worth remembering, and to make sure that the people who come after us have the chance to learn from the mistakes we made. The House of David did that. They left a story that is as wild, as complicated, and as human as any story can be. And for that, they will always be a part of the American experience.
The story doesn't end with a neat conclusion, because life never does. It ends with the slow fading of a dream and the quiet return to the world they tried so hard to leave behind. It ends with the realization that no matter how hard we try to separate ourselves from the rest of the world, we are all connected. We are all part of the same story, and we are all responsible for how that story ends. So, take this story with you. Think about it. Talk about it. And the next time you see someone who looks a little bit different, or someone who is trying to build something that seems a little bit crazy, remember the House of David. Remember that there is always more than meets the eye, and that the most important truth is usually the one that is hiding in plain sight. The kingdom of the long-haired giants is a story for the ages. It is a story about the human heart, about the search for meaning, and about the dangerous power of an idea. It is a story that deserves to be told, and it is a story that deserves to be heard. And that is why we are here. That is why we tell these stories, because they matter. They matter to us, and they matter to the world. We will keep digging into the past,
looking for these forgotten slices of history, and we will keep sharing them with you. Because as long as there are stories to be told, we will be here to tell them. And as long as you are here to listen, we will have a reason to keep going. Thank you for being part of this journey and for helping us keep these stories alive. There are so many more stories out there, waiting to be discovered. There are so many more secrets waiting to be revealed, and we can't wait to share them all with you.
So keep your eyes open, keep your minds open, and never stop questioning, because that is how we grow. That is how we learn. And that is how we make sure that the past is never truly forgotten. The House of David is just one story, but it is a powerful one. It is a story that has everything we need to understand the world a little bit better. It is a story that shows us the best and the worst of humanity. And it is a story that reminds us that we are all on this journey together. So let's keep moving forward. Let's keep learning. And let's keep telling the stories that define who we are. We are all connected by the stories we share. We are all part of the same collection of human experience. And as long as we keep telling these stories, we will always have a way to connect with each other and a way to understand the world around us. So thank you for listening, and we will